Hi Adam, nice to meet you. Could you please introduce yourself in just 2 sentences?
I'm a climber that enjoys climbing a lot, actually.
A lot of progress has happened in the past 20 years. During your climbing career, the limits have shifted from about 9A plus before to 9C now. What do you think? What will climbing look in about 20 years?
In a way, not so much. I think will change. I think what is important that the climbing will keep its disciplines. I think maybe some years ago people were afraid that the adventure part from the climbing would maybe lose its importance. But I think what is important that we have bouldering, we have sport climbing. If you want to experience some adventures, you can go into some remote places. You can still experience a lot of adventure even here in the Alps. So I think this diversification and that everybody is able to find whatever he wants and needs, that's important. And I think climbing in that way will stay the same. In terms of progression of sport climbing, if I look back, I see that it was really important that in progression of sport climbing, bouldering was important. Because I think some years ago in the 20s, it was like the era of most of the hard routes were chipped. And people thought that the further progression in sport climbing is via just making longer and longer and more endurance routes. But this proved to be wrong. For sure you can make a very hard route which is all about the endurance, but the bouldering made it possible for the people to actually perceive that the hard route can be also bouldery, and it doesn't even have to be chipped because of that. Because it's really hard to find a super homogeneous route on the rock. And I think the raising of level in bouldering actually helped so much in raising the level of sport climbing. Because if you look at all the 9B, 9B pluses, 9Cs, for sure you need a certain level of endurance and power endurance, but it's mostly based on linking some harder cruxes, bouldery cruxes together. And actually in some of the hardest routes you can find some of the hardest boulder problems in the world. But it's somewhere there with the rope higher up.
And do you think that the Olympic Games will push the limits even further in terms of difficulty?
I do believe that Olympics have very low impact on outdoor climbing. Okay. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe climbing will be so attractive for the young generation to start with that we will have super strong bouldering kids that will just realize themselves on the rock. But yeah, let's see. I think definitely more people will climb in the gym, but not necessarily more people will climb on the rock. I think that the fear that our cracks would be just way too overcrowded to actually climb on them, I wouldn't be that afraid.
I think so too. But not only the difficulty has changed, also the material. If you look back now, about 20 years, there were different climbing shoes. If you think about something like a knee pad, wasn't pretty common that days. What could you imagine to be another equipment thing to push the limits?
For sure, we can have better harnesses, we can have better beaners, lighter, but I don't think there will be some major breakthrough. I think there is still a big space in kind of training smarter. Climbing is still very, very young sport in that perspective. And I think it's not only where you train, but really taking a small kids and focusing on the complexity of the climbing. Because when we think of training, it's mostly just training on the physical skills, but training the technique is equally or even more important. But now it's more happened that somebody is talented enough, has the feeling for the movement, and he's lucky. But if some kid is less talented, then he ends up just using his feet and body a little less. And that's of course a big disadvantage. Because then in the end the climbing performance consists of so many different skills. And the physical part is just one of them. It's important for sure, but it's better to be good in everything.
Another question about you. became very popular the past years. Are you sometimes surprised about the publicity you finally have?
Surprised, like for sure I get some funny stories,
Yeah.
like random people meeting me on the street that have never climbed, and for sure it can get a little bit annoying sometimes. Like for sure I don't climb for being famous. I climb because I enjoy it, and like this fame is kind of thing that comes along with that. It's relatively small price to pay to be able to like live the dream, but for sure it's there. And sometimes for sure, like being in the gym in some other city where nobody knows me, and it's a like big thing. I'm there in the gym, so it's easy to get distracted from like the training, you know.
Yeah, but sometimes you really get interesting stories
Yeah.
that meet you actually. So in your video series, which I like very much, you describe how the Olympics Games changed you. How do you think Olympia will change climbing?
It will change climbing in the gym a lot, and it's already happening for sure. Like the climbing gyms will be bigger, shinier, maybe more crowded, but then more gyms will be built. But it will change the sport, like the competition of climbing. It will change for sure. I'm hoping that it will get more media attention from like the mainstream, and I think that's a good thing. But climbing, if we are talking about climbing as a whole, again about the outdoor, I'm hoping and I really think that not so much will change.
Okay. And it's a lot of things were said about the format of the Olympic with the speed, and just imagine speed wouldn't be a part of the Olympic disciplines anymore. Would you still do it because it brings you further?
So for sure, if it was combination of boulder and lead, I would be so much happier. Because combination of boulder and lead makes sense, like historically. But combining all three disciplines, like if you look at like the evolution of climbing itself, it just makes no sense.
Okay.
But I think the most importantly why I disagree with the format is that it's not attractive. It might be relatively attractive for the climbers that are really into climbing and they don't mind watching climbing for 3.5 hours. But for the like mainstream audience, 3.5 hours is just way too much.
Okay. But as a person, did you learn something new by the speed climbing for your technique? Or?
In terms of technique, I think it's like speed is completely opposite.
Okay.
Like all the things that kind of work well in lead, you have to kind of forget in speed.
Okay.
Because in lead it's all about like moving efficiently. In speed, you forget about efficiency, you just want to get up as fast as possible. But there, while training for speed, I definitely must admit that there are some components, some things that make you feel stronger in bouldering. Like sometimes, and even on the rock, you get like these boulders where you have like a decent hold, but it's really steep and the feet are really bad, and you just need this like raw explosive power. For that, speed training helps.
Okay. So, one last question. For you as a climber, what do the big brand, the big sponsors mean? And how do you think this thing changed climbing? If you think back about 30 years, there weren't really a lot of big brands supporting the climbers.
Yeah, the companies grow bigger in the meantime, just as the climbing grow bigger. But at least the companies that I'm working with, I'm really glad that yes, they are now huge, but they still like the core remains the same. They are mostly climbers making things for climbers.
Okay.
And that's for me, it's really important.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah. Welcome.